Hey guys, this is Zach with 8020 Media, here today with a video on the Ford 3.5 EcoBoost versus 5.0 Coyote. Specifically here, we're going to be looking at the Ford F-150 as a comparison, since that's really one of the only models that has both of these engines as an option, and with the popularity of the F-150 is clearly something that comes up a lot when you're looking to purchase an F-150. Should you buy the 3.5 EcoBoost or opt for the naturally aspirated 5-liter V8 engine? So jumping right into things, the most notable difference between these two engines is with the EcoBoost, you're getting a 3.5-liter twin turbocharged V6, whereas with the Coyote, you're getting a 5-liter naturally aspirated V8. Now, despite the difference in displacement and the number of cylinders, obviously the 3.5 EcoBoost has the turbocharged advantage. And so ultimately that brings them pretty close from a horsepower perspective. The 3.5 EcoBoost delivers anywhere from 365 to 400 horsepower, whereas the 5-liter V8 delivers anywhere from 360 to 400 horsepower. This mostly depends on model year, as there are a couple different generations of the EcoBoost as well as a couple different generations of the 5.0 Coyote. So over time, those power ratings have gone up a little bit, and so those lower numbers, or if you're looking back to earlier trucks with these engines like 2011, whereas the 400 horsepower ratings are going to be for the newer 2022, 2023 models. Now, where the EcoBoost does have the advantage is in torque, and so it delivers anywhere from 420 to 500 pound-feet of torque, whereas the 5-liter Coyote is anywhere from 380 pound-feet up to 400 pound-feet of torque. So again, very similar in horsepower. Looking at it year for year, the engines have pretty much been within about 5 or 10 horsepower of each other. But when it comes to torque, the EcoBoost has held an advantage from anywhere from about 40 pound-feet of torque up to 100 pound-feet of torque, looking at the newest models of the EcoBoost, which have that 500 torque. So pretty big advantage there for the EcoBoost, especially looking at newer models. Diving right into towing, we'll jump back to these numbers and discuss towing a little bit more in depth, but just giving the surface numbers here. Looking at max towing capacity, the 3.5 EcoBoost and the newest F-150s can tow up to a maximum 14,000 pounds. Whereas the 5-liter Coyote is good for up to 13,000 pounds. So again, those numbers depend on exact model and year, but pretty much throughout the life of these two engines in the F-150, the EcoBoost has held an advantage of about 1,000 additional pounds of towing capacity. Payload, very similar numbers for both of these engines. The 3.5 EcoBoost has a max payload capacity of 3,250 pounds, whereas the Coyote has a payload capacity up to 3,326 pounds. So pretty similar there. Again, we'll circle back to that discussion and provide some more notes on that. Just wanted to cover some of the basic specs and basic differences between the 3.5-liter V6 and the 5-liter naturally aspirated V8. Moving into performance, the 3.5 EcoBoost is going to be faster, most notably because of the additional 50 to 100 pounds of torque or so. So if you look at 0 to 60 times on a similarly equipped truck, the 3.5 EcoBoost is probably going to be about 4 or 5 tenths of a second faster. Again, there are a lot of variables that go into that, and so on one day the 5.0 Coyote might get the edge, another day the 3.5 EcoBoost might get the edge, just depends on traction and a lot of other conditions and variables. But in general, all else equal, the EcoBoost is going to be about a half a second quicker, give or take a couple tenths of a second. When it comes to modding these engines, if you're planning to buy one of these trucks and you're looking for even more power than they already offer, then both the 3.5 and 5.0 are both very capable engines when it comes to tuning and aftermarket mods. Again, the EcoBoost, at least looking at basic bolt-on mods, looking at a tune, intake, downpipes, or headers for the 5.0 Coyote, looking at some of those basic bolt-ons, the 3.5-liter is going to have the advantage just since it is forced induction, and forced induction engines tend to pick up power a lot easier, at least with those simple bolt-on mods. So again, another advantage for the 3.5-liter EcoBoost. However, if you're looking to build something like a racing truck or something that you're really just looking for speed and acceleration, then the 5.0 Coyote is going to have the advantage if you have the budget to do something like forced induction and actually adding a supercharger or turbochargers to the 5-liter V8. Then that additional 1.5 liters of displacement is going to give it the advantage, and it's also probably going to be the stronger engine, more likely to hold up in the longer term. Again, if you're looking to make huge power numbers like 700, 800 plus horsepower, then the 5-liter engine is probably the better choice. But nonetheless, most people aren't looking to go to those extremes, and so again, the 3.5 EcoBoost has the advantage in stock form, as well as with basic bolt-on mods. Circling back to fuel economy and towing, the 3.5 EcoBoost has the advantage in both of these categories. It delivers a few miles per gallon better than the 5.0 Coyote. Depends on exact options on the truck and a couple other factors. But in general, the 3.5 EcoBoost offers better fuel economy. The one downside I will say to a turbocharged or any forced induction car is the fuel economy ratings can look better than they often are in the real world. And that's especially true if you start getting into boost a lot and really calling on those turbochargers. Then that can certainly drop fuel economy, especially in the city. On the highway, just cruising, the 3.5 EcoBoost will hold the advantage. But around the city, again, if you're really getting onto the gas a lot, then they can be a lot closer than the actual fuel economy ratings may suggest. A few additional notes for towing. Again, the 3.5 has the advantage with the extra 1,000-pound towing capacity. And it's also generally better at higher elevations, since forced induction engines tend to lose a little bit less power and torque at higher elevations than a naturally aspirated engine. So that's another benefit of having the 3.5 twin turbocharged V6. The EcoBoost is going to be better in the lower end and the mid-range, around that 2,000 to 4,000 RPM ballpark. The EcoBoost is going to have much better torque, and that's very helpful if you're towing heavier loads, especially in hilly or mountainous areas. Big advantage to the 3.5 EcoBoost. Now, one downside with the EcoBoost and turbochargers is they generate a lot of heat. So the one thing that we would recommend with the 3.5 liter V6 is if you are planning to tow 10,000 plus pounds or somewhere close to that fairly consistently, again, especially in hilly or mountainous areas, you should probably consider a front mount intercooler upgrade for the 3.5 EcoBoost. That will help keep those intake temperatures in check and make sure that you're really getting maximum performance and keeping the engine safe and healthy and keeping that air a little bit cooler. So that is the one flaw with the turbo design, is that they do generate a little bit more heat, and that can be a little strenuous and a little challenging when you're towing heavier loads, up steep inclines or anything like that. So front mount intercooler, great upgrade if you plan to go with the 3.5 EcoBoost and plan to do some pretty heavy duty towing. Last couple things here, pretty quick summary, since these engines do offer very similar performance in stock form and a lot of similar traits. Price is another difference between the 3.5 EcoBoost and the 5.0 Coyote. The 2.7 EcoBoost is actually standard and has been standard in the F-150 since that engine came out. So the 3.5 EcoBoost and 5.0 Coyote are both upgrade options for the F-150. And they're very similar in price, but the 3.5 EcoBoost has generally been about $400 to $600 more expensive than the 5.0. So a little bit of an advantage to the Coyote there, in the sense that it's just ever so slightly cheaper, but probably not a big enough difference to really sell you on one engine or the other, especially considering the 3.5 EcoBoost has the better fuel economy ratings. And so after 20, 30, 40,000 miles, you can pretty quickly wipe out the difference in that $400 premium for the 3.5 EcoBoost. Reliability for the 3.5 and the 5.0, that's also very similar between these two engines. We believe they're both great engines that offer above average reliability. Exact results can just come down to the luck of the draw. I will say, if you're looking at 2011 to 2016, the 5.0 Coyote probably has a slight advantage, since the 3.5 EcoBoost had some of those timing chain problems, as well as carbon buildup in the earlier days. And then they moved to port injection on the second gen 3.5 EcoBoost, and that wiped out those carbon buildup concerns, and they also addressed the timing chain issues. So big advantage for the 2017 plus 3.5 EcoBoost, but again, that puts it on similar terms with the 5.0 Coyote. So reliability, again, pretty similar between these engines. Probably just comes down to how well they were maintained in the past, how well they're maintained moving forward once you actually buy the truck. That really covers most of the stuff that we had to discuss in this video. In summary, both of these engines are great. We love them both in the F-150, Our preference is the 3.5 Ecoboost. That said, it really comes down to each individual, which engine is best for you. What are your personal preferences? Do you want the more capable engine, which is a 3.5 Ecoboost, or do you want the simplicity of a naturally aspirated V8 that still delivers great performance and great towing and payload capacity and has those traditional V8 sounds? That said, that wraps up our F-150 3.5 versus 5.0 video. If you guys enjoyed the content, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and check out the description below for more awesome content on the F-150. Thanks, guys.